Welcome to our first ever Maris podcast. Today you are joined by Gabby and Chloe, who will be the hosts of this episode. In these podcasts, we will be covering Maris events. We'll have a little legend segment. We'll have interviews, quizzes with educators and students. We'll have competitions and much, much more. As this is our first podcast, we thought it would be a great idea to talk about how Maris came about. So with that being said, welcome our first guest, Mr. McGregor. Hello.
Thanks, Chloe. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Very well.
All right, Gabby.
So I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions that you can answer. So the first question is, was it a goal of yours to open a new school in Bendigo?
Probably wasn't a personal goal to open a new school. I'd never actually really thought about it. I didn't think a new school would actually start here, but it's certainly been an absolute privilege to have the chance to be principal of a new school.
Nice. Next question is, how long did it take to plan Marist?
One of the really interesting things about planning Marist was that originally it wasn't going to be a new school. So the idea was that the land that Marist is now on was bought in 2009. And the reason it was bought way back in 2009, the idea was that there was going to be a campus of Catholic College Bendigo, where I was the principal at the time, and a separate primary school. And for the first 3 years, that kept going as the plan. And so I was involved as the principal of Catholic College Bendigo, thinking that I was going to have the principalship of a year 7 to 9 campus out here. So there are going to be 2 7 to 9 campuses, one here and one at Juniton, and then everyone was going to go into the city for the main year 10, 11 and 12. And there was going to be a separate primary school. Then around 2012, the Marists made the decision of let's pull out of governance of Catholic College Bendigo and let's start our own school. And then not only did they decide to start a secondary school, but they worked with the Catholic Education Office to, instead of having a primary school, have it to be foundation through to year 12. But it wasn't until early to mid 2013 that all those decisions had been made. So it took 4 years to actually have the decision that it was going to be a Marist school F to 12. And then we had all the work to do to design the buildings and so on.
Very nice. Next question is, was the school always going to be prep to 12?
Yeah, it's a good question because even when, as I said, they said that the Marist would run the secondary school, there was still a lot of talk about having a primary school here as well. If that had have happened, there would have actually, they were pretty keen to have a fence between the two schools. So where Champagne and most of Montagna is, that area would have been where the secondary school is, and where Lavalla and the Hermitage and Marl, that area would have been a separate school, and that would have been a primary school run by the Catholic Education Office. So thankfully, the people involved made the right decision to call it one school, F to 12, no fences, no boundaries, and well, I think you'd agree we've ended up with a pretty good result.
Cool. Who were some of the main people involved in the process from the start?
Oh, gee, that's testing my memory. That's taken me back a long way. Remember too that it was going to start as part of Catholic College. So I was involved from the very beginning. And one of the things that I sort of said that was non-negotiable, if you like, was that I wanted to have the architects that were working with us at Catholic College Bendigo at the time to be the architects out here. So Matt Dwyer, who's the main architect at Y2 and who designed the Alumbra Theatre, Matt has been involved since the very start. Monsignor Marriott, who is now retired, was involved right from the very start. And a lot of the other players, if you like, have all moved on. Then when we started to employ staff, I don't know if you follow the Australian cricket team, but you know how the Australian cricket team, they have numbers on their caps for what number they were employed as?
No.
Yeah.
Well, we've actually kept records here. So each staff member who works at Marist, I've actually got the number that they were employed in order. So we're up to number 160 at the moment, but I get the honour of being number one. But the second person who was actually employed was Ms. Talbot. And Miss Talbot, so she's number two, because when our year sevens were out at Juniton, she was the head of house for that year. And then in that year, we had other staff come on. So numbers 2 through to 7 are Mr. Darmody, Mr. Tasker, Mrs. Zetlin, Mrs. Hamilton, and Mrs. Lewis. So they all came on as the original staff.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's a good bit of history. And a few people want me to actually create a Marist type cricket cap so they can have their numbers on them. I haven't seen a staff member yet with a tattoo that they've put their number on, but you never know.
What inspired you to build another Catholic school in Bendigo?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was, as I said, it was going to be part of CCB, and that was because the numbers were growing so quickly. If we hadn't have built it, it looked like CCB would end up being a school of 3,000 kids, and there's no way I wanted to be principal of a school of 3,000 kids. So then the head of the Marist at the time, Brother Michael Green, said to me, why don't we start our own school? Why don't we start a Marist school? Because even though CCB's Marist, no one really knows that it's Marist. So let's put our name right out there and start a new school. And it's the first school that a religious order has started in Australia in 60 years. So for the Marists to say, let's build a new school, was really, really courageous. And if you think about it, isn't it great that they did? Like the fact that we all just say at Marist or I'm a Marist or we're Marist, if it hadn't have had that Marist connection to it, think of all the things that we wouldn't have been able to build so quickly around, school spirit and that sort of stuff. But it was Brother Michael Green, the Marist brother, who said to me, let's do it. Let's have a crack. Let's start a new school.
Yeah,
And
right. That's cool.
Yeah, it's cool, isn't it?
Yeah. Chloe,
So thank you, Miss McGregor, for coming on here and telling us a bit about Marist.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
And thank you all for listening to our first Marist podcast. We are hoping to have a new podcast out around every 2 weeks. And yeah, thank you for listening.